Imagine reading a novel, and years later, that novel helps spark a revolution that changes half the world. In 1863, a Russian novel called What Is to Be Done told the story of a young woman dreaming of a fair and equal society. To most readers, it was simply fiction, but for one young Russian man, it became inspiration. His name was Vladimir Ulyanov. The world would later know him as Lenin. His ideas would inspire millions, terrify governments, and help create one of the most powerful nations in modern history. But how did a young student become the leader of a revolution that changed the world? Let's find out. In the late 1800s, Russia was one of the largest empires on Earth. It was ruled by the Tsar, a powerful monarch who controlled almost everything. Most Russians were poor peasants, while nobles and wealthy landowners enjoyed enormous privileges. Meanwhile, Western Europe was changing rapidly. Factories were growing, industries were expanding, and people were demanding political rights. Russia, however, remained trapped in the past. Although some reforms were introduced, real change never came. As frustration grew, revolutionary ideas began spreading among students, workers, and intellectuals. The empire looked strong from the outside, but inside, cracks were already forming. Lenin was born in 1870 into a relatively educated middle-class family. His father worked in education and strongly believed in learning and progress, but tragedy struck early. First, Lenin's father died unexpectedly. Then an even bigger shock followed. His older brother Alexander was arrested and executed for participating in a plot against the Tsar. For the young Lenin, everything changed. His family became associated with rebellion. Many friends avoided them. Society treated them with suspicion. Instead of breaking him, these events pushed Lenin toward radical politics. He became obsessed with one question: how could Russia be changed? Discovering revolutionary ideas, Lenin studied law and became interested in socialist and Marxist ideas. Karl Marx believed that workers would eventually rise against capitalism and create a more equal society. Lenin agreed with many of Marx's ideas, but he saw a problem. Russia was not like Germany or Britain. It was still largely agricultural. If Russia waited for industrial capitalism to fully develop, change might take generations. Lenin believed revolution could happen sooner. He argued that a small, disciplined revolutionary party could guide workers and peasants toward political change. This idea would later become one of the foundations of Bolshevism. Exile and political growth. Because of his political activities, Lenin was arrested and sent into exile in Siberia. But exile did not stop him. He spent his time reading, writing, organizing, and developing his political theories. After his release, he moved across Europe and helped publish revolutionary newspapers. One of the most important was a newspaper called Iskra, meaning the spark. The goal was simple: spread revolutionary ideas throughout Russia. Lenin was no longer just a student, he was becoming a political leader. By the early 1900s, Russia faced growing problems. Poverty was widespread. Workers were angry. The government seemed incapable of solving major issues. Then came the Russo-Japanese War. Russia expected an easy victory. Instead, it suffered a humiliating defeat. Public confidence in the government collapsed. In 1905, thousands of workers marched peacefully to present their demands to the Tsar. They wanted better working conditions and political reforms. Instead of listening, government troops opened fire. Hundreds were killed or wounded. The event became known as Bloody Sunday. For many Russians, it destroyed the image of the Tsar as a protector of the people. The desire for revolution grew stronger. World War I changes everything. In 1914, Russia entered World War I. The war quickly became a disaster. Millions of soldiers were killed or wounded. Food shortages spread across the country. Inflation skyrocketed. Families suffered. Factories struggled. The government appeared completely overwhelmed. By 1917, Russia was collapsing under the pressure. Then came the final spark. Women protesting food shortages took to the streets. Workers joined them. Students joined them. Eventually, even soldiers began refusing orders. The protests became a revolution. The Tsar was forced to abdicate. For the first time in centuries, Russia no longer had a Tsar. After the Tsar fell, a temporary government took power, but it made a critical mistake. It continued the war. The Russian people were exhausted. They wanted peace, food, and change. At this moment, Lenin returned to Russia. He immediately presented a bold program: peace, land, bread. These simple promises resonated with millions. Lenin argued that all power should go to councils representing workers and soldiers, known as Soviets. His message spread rapidly. Support for the Bolsheviks grew. In October 1917, Lenin and the Bolsheviks acted. Led by key figures such as Leon Trotsky, revolutionary forces seized important locations across the capital. Government buildings were occupied. Communication centers were taken. The temporary government collapsed. The Bolsheviks had taken power. For the first time in history, a government claiming to represent workers and peasants controlled a major country. Lenin became the leader of the new state. After taking power, Lenin moved quickly. Land was redistributed. Russia withdrew from World War I. Major industries and banks were brought under state control. Supporters saw these actions as the beginning of a more equal society. Critics saw them as dangerous experiments. Either way, the world was watching. But Lenin's biggest challenge was still ahead: civil war. Not everyone accepted Bolshevik rule. A brutal civil war erupted. The Red Army fought against various opponents collectively known as the White Army. The conflict devastated Russia. Millions died from fighting, disease, and famine. Cities were damaged. The economy suffered enormously. Yet despite these hardships, the Bolsheviks eventually emerged victorious. In 1922, the Soviet Union was officially established. A new superpower had been born. Lenin's victory shocked the world. Revolutionaries everywhere suddenly believed that dramatic political change was possible. Socialist and communist movements appeared across Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. His influence extended far beyond Russia. Supporters viewed him as a champion of workers and the poor. Opponents viewed him as a threat to freedom and democracy. Either way, his impact was impossible to ignore. The final years. As Lenin's health declined, he became increasingly worried about the future. One man concerned him more than anyone else: Joseph Stalin. Stalin had quietly built influence within the Communist Party. Lenin feared too much power was accumulating in Stalin's hands. Before his death, Lenin warned party leaders about him. But after Lenin died in 1924, those warnings were largely ignored. Eventually, Stalin took control. What followed was one of the most controversial periods in modern history. So how should history remember Lenin? Was he a visionary who fought for equality, or was he the architect of a system that later enabled dictatorship? The answer depends on who you ask. What cannot be denied is his influence. Lenin transformed political theory into political reality. He helped bring down an empire. He inspired revolutions around the world, and he changed the course of the 20th century forever. More than a century later, historians still debate his legacy. But one thing remains certain: few individuals have left a mark on history as large as Vladimir Lenin.